In the black humidity of August 1942, an army that believed night belonged to them. In this program, we will analyze how Germany went from being on the verge of victory weighted toward an airstrip they thought would fall in hours. Instead, the island itself seemed to switch allegiance. Mosquitoes came in sheets, rivers hid disease, and every thicket concealed a firing lane. What Japanese officers expected to be a quick purge became the first crack in an empire's mirror. Proof that courage shatters when it collides with systems. Stay through the end for the moment the jungle stops being scenery and becomes a weapon. From World War II. August 1942. The Solomons breathed like a furnace. Marines of the 1st Marine Division have seized a half-finished airstrip at Lunga Point, then watched the horizon burn as Allied cruisers sink at Savo. Food is rationed, ammo is counted, crates sit on the beach with no ships to take their place. From Tokyo, the picture looks different. Reports from China and the Philippines still echo. Americans are soft, officers cautious, night their weakness. Into that myth strides Colonel Kona Ichiki. Sharp uniform, shaved resolve, convinced that shock at midnight can erase a runway at dawn. He lands a vanguard east of the perimeter by destroyer. A silent blade slipped under the moon. Scouts push out through kunai grass and palms. The jungle clamps down behind them like a door. They see wire, shallow pits, a river mouth the maps barely admit. No artillery flashes, no tank tracks, no roar of engines. Surely a thin line of frightened men. Ichi reads the quiet as fear, not design. Inside the perimeter, the Americans don't swagger. They diagram. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Creswell's Marines thread Browning water-cooled guns to overlap, notch in 37mm pieces loaded with canister, register mortars, and walk artillery rounds to the far bank. Range cards multiply, lanes harden, a sandbar becomes math. The first collision isn't the battle Ichi plans, it's a warning. Captain Charles Brush's patrol stumbles into a Japanese element, kills in seconds, and drags back documents that rewrite the enemy's estimate. Strength is larger, intent is immediate. General Vandergrift shifts weight toward the river, knitting a trap from fields of fire and patience. At dusk, sweat hangs like rain. Mosquitoes ghost the helmets, and somewhere beyond the palms, a column forms. Spirit is coming, geometry is waiting. Midnight gathers on the palms. Offshore, destroyers loiter for sprint. The tide lifts the sandbar, and the island holds its breath. By mid-August, the ragged strip of dirt at Lunga Point had already changed the Pacific's geometry. To Tokyo, it was a nuisance. To the Marines hunched over shovels in the heat, it was salvation. Henderson Field, named for Major Lofton Henderson, killed at Midway, was a promise that the Americans would not give ground again. Each day, engineers scraped coral and clay under fire, piecing together a runway long enough to launch salvation from the jungle. Within a week, the first F-4F Wildcats and SBD Dauntless bombers coughed skyward, rising into the haze like a rebuke to defeat. From that moment, the balance of daylight itself shifted. Every Japanese ship, every barge, every transport entering a 200-mile radius could be attacked by aircraft based on that narrow coral strip. Henderson Field turned the surrounding sea into a daylight trap. Japan's proud destroyers, once untouchable predators, were forced to become nocturnal runners, the infamous Tokyo Express. They thundered down the slot at night, hurling men and crates onto beaches, vanishing before dawn. But what they delivered was never enough. They brought bodies, not weight. No artillery, no tanks, no bulk fuel. By day, the Cactus Air Force ruled. American planes swarmed out of Henderson like hornets, shredding any Japanese convoy foolish enough to linger past sunrise. Pilots landed their shot-up aircraft on dirt runways, refueled from hand-pumped barrels, and took off again before the mud dried. They slept in foxholes beside their planes, listening to the thunder of Japanese bombers that came but rarely hit. For the Marines below, every dawn that saw aircraft still lifting meant another day alive. For Japan, the realization came slow and bitter. Whoever held that runway held the island, and whoever held the island held the surrounding sea. The empire could own the night, but the Americans now owned time itself. As the jungle steamed and the flies thickened, the war's first offensive had quietly become its first pivot. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Henderson's glow, Colonel Ichiki was preparing to prove that spirit could still eclipse steel. The night of August 20th, 1942, the jungle near the Elu River, misnamed the Tenaru, was blacker than ink. Colonel Ichi believed victory would come before dawn. His men fixed bayonets, tightened helmets, and whispered the same phrase that had carried them through China: "Spirit conquers steel." At 2 a.m., nearly 900 soldiers surged forward, charging across the sandbar that separated them from Henderson Field. The moon glinted on rifles and swords as battle cries split the humid air. But ahead of them, unseen through the palms, geometry waited. Marine engineers had measured every foot of that river mouth. Heavy Browning M, 1917, water-cooled machine guns sat in pairs, their barrels trained to intersect over the sandbar. Behind them, 37mm anti-tank guns were loaded not with shells, but with canister rounds, giant shotgun blasts of steel. As the first Japanese wave reached midstream, the jungle erupted. Streams of red tracers sped through the dark. The Brownings roared without pause, steam hissing from their jackets as crews poured water into boiling sleeves. Men shouted fire corrections through clenched jaws, while the ground disappeared beneath splintering coconuts and torn bodies. Wave after wave hit the line, each smaller than the last. Grenades arced, bayonets flashed, and for moments, Marines and Japanese soldiers grappled hand to hand among shell craters slick with blood. But every charge was met with precision fire. Each attempt dissolved in the relentless rhythm of American coordination. By 4 a.m., the sandbar was a graveyard. Bodies floated in the shallow surf, weapons tangled in roots and vines. At dawn, silence fell, broken only by the slow advance of 5 M3 Stuart tanks rolling across the river. They hunted the wounded through coconut groves, firing canister shells into the trees. What Ichi had promised would be a triumph became annihilation. Of his 917 men, more than 800 were dead. Ichuki himself lay among them, his sword beside his body. The Americans had lost 40. The myth of Japanese invincibility had met its first crack in the mud of the Tenaru. But Tokyo would not believe it. Yet in the aftermath of Ichiki's annihilation, Japan refused to see defeat. It saw delay. Reinforcements would erase embarrassment. Fast destroyers became lifelines, turning nights around Guadalcanal into streaks of phosphorescent wakes and engine thunder. American Marines called it the Tokyo Express, but to the Japanese it was desperation with a timetable. Each sleek ship could carry a few hundred men, but almost no cargo. What arrived on the beaches were hungry soldiers without their war. Rifles, yes, but no heavy guns, no vehicles, no proper rations. An army of shadows stepping ashore under blackout, carrying faith instead of food. From August through early September, the destroyer runs multiplied. 5,000 men, Major General Kawaguchi's brigade, slipped ashore east of Henderson Field, ready to renew Japan's offensive. The system was fast, efficient, even elegant, but fundamentally broken. Every man delivered cost fuel Japan couldn't spare, and every trip left behind the very things that turned men into armies, artillery, ammunition, medicine, rice.